Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable Behavior Explained. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Adaptable today. We are going to talk about a hard topic, but an important topic, and that is how to minimize the damage and the trauma when divorcing. And that's going to be related to adults, but primarily we're going to talk about children and how to hopefully mitigate some of the damage that we inadvertently do, even when we're trying very hard to be good parents, and give you some of the tips and tricks to perhaps avoid some of that damage. I've got with me today Dianne Sullivan. She is a family law attorney. She specializes in collaborative divorce, mediation, and has an extensive additional training in trauma, which I find would be an amazing skill set for all attorneys to have because this topic is traumatic in nature. And so, Dianne, please introduce yourself and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for all those accolades. Yes, as you said, my name is Dianne. I'm an attorney, been an attorney for approximately 25 years. I'm a former domestic violence prosecutor. I am trained in collaborative law, trained in mediation. And I've been practicing family law for quite some time. My undergraduate degree is in behavioral sciences. And as an attorney, I reached a point where I felt that I would better serve clients if I sort of sought out some more mental health skills and mental health training, and how can I continue to assist clients by being able to meet them where they're at in their process.
And you've been such a tremendous advocate in your field because I've even presented on trauma and damage that, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, which I have another show talking more deeply about that. But divorce always causes trauma and would put a person's ACEs score at 1 right out the gate. And that's if you do everything well. And so I appreciate that you take special interest in this topic. I think it's really important. Just as an aside, if you're more interested in divorce, collaborative divorce and mediation, we do have another show with Dianne about that topic if you want to dig in and learn a little bit more about that. But this show specifically about children mostly and how to mitigate some of that damage. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
And on that topic, can you tell us a little bit about I've decided I'm not going to work out with my spouse. How do I want to approach this with my children if this is the decision that's been made? What's the best way to start this process when it comes to our kids?
Well, in a perfect world, that is done in a therapeutic mental health setting. If the child has a therapist, you can lean on the child's therapist to help you in that process. Even if you or one or both of the parents has a therapist, at minimum, you can get some input from that mental health provider about what is the best way for me to approach my children. All else fails, you don't have those kind of resources or there's no mental health services on board. It should be a discussion between the parents and the children. They should not be hearing it from just one parent.
Right. So everybody needs to be there together.
Yes.
So that it is a family discussion and a family decision. And of course, to parents always, I shouldn't say always, parents often say, we love you. It's not your fault. It's just that we don't get along and things like that. But inadvertently, especially if the children are really, really young, they will personalize the decision. Mm-hmm. Had I just been better, they wouldn't be splitting up. And so it's really hard for children to not have that be the internal dialogue that is made up about themselves when it comes to the dissolution of their family.
Yes.
And I've seen it over and over. I personally, my folks split when I was 12. That, was single-handedly the most traumatic thing I ever went through growing up, which, and some would say, what a blessing for you, but it destroyed me. I go from a Leave It to Beaver story to just all of a sudden I lose one parent because we moved states. I mean, everything was just really treacherous. So had this kind of information been around, I have a feeling, my parents love me. I don't think they would have done it this way had they known better. When we know better, we do better. So this show is an important topic because 50% of people divorce.
Yes.
And so those statistics are not in favor of this not being part of our potential future and outcome. And so if this is where people are dealing with, this life change, hopefully they do what they need to find the resources to at least do it more informed, for sure. Okay, so how can parents best protect their children's mental health when they are going through this process? What do you suggest?
Well, I mean, I always recommend to people who are going through divorce, get your child, if they don't have a therapist already, in with the therapist. That's going to give that child a safe space to be able to express themselves, to be able to give in. I had one therapist call it once, tools in a toolbox. And I thought it was such a great analogy. Give that child, that toolbox goes with them everywhere because it's up here. Give them a tool to where if they're in a situation and they're feeling really overwhelmed because now they have to live in two households, they have a good way to handle that and or be able to advocate for themselves. Make sure children know their only role is to be a child. Right. They're not your confidant. They don't have to fix anything between you and dad. Their only role is to be children. And it's up to you as parents to be parents. Right. And don't be, sending messages back and forth with your children. Things that are, it's just an example, but there are a lot of things that as parents, we sometimes just don't think before doing. And you really just have to be more mindful of what your children are going through. Right. That you get to live in one house, even after a divorce. Your children now have to live in two houses.
Right. So how do we avoid putting our kids in the middle? Because this is something that I see in nearly every single divorced situation and co-parenting situation where I find the parents, even when they're trying pretty hard, they will mistakenly put their kids in the middle. So what are some of the ways that you see kids being put in the middle during this process?
It's hard. I'm still guilty of doing it myself because my youngest is now 17. And how much easier is it to say, hey, can you tell your dad this rather than me taking the time to call her dad or send him a text? So it's just sometimes as parents, we don't think, so it's keeping in mind that even just innocuous things like that, hey, tell your dad or your mom this. Now your kids are like, even if it's subconscious, it's like, well, what if I get it wrong? I mean, what if I tell them the wrong thing? What if I don't do it right? It's like, that's not their job,
right?
So you just have to really be mindful of keeping in mind that your child's only job is to be a child. Right. That's it.
The other thing that I have seen that is really toxic is parents who talk to their child about the egregious behavior of the other parent. And I see this not just in divorce, but I see it in homes that are not divided or not split up, where we are creating an alignment with a child, like, you saw what he did, you know how he is, and those things. And I think that people don't realize how damaging that is for children, whether they're 2 years old or they're 22 years old or they're 82 years old. If you're talking about the parent in a disparaging way, even if they've seen it, they understand the behavior of their parent. When that parent is talking about them in a negative way, they're inadvertently saying, half of you is like this.
Yes.
And I don't think they recognize that's the message that they're saying to their children. Part of you, half of who you are as a person, carries traits that I just despise, and I'm here to remind you of that. And I don't think people understand how subconsciously that is so damaging to a child.
They don't.
It really is.
I have that talk with parents all the time. I said, look, deep down in your heart of hearts that your ex-husband, ex-wife loves this child. Right. And that if they knew the damage they were doing, they wouldn't do it.
What about parentification? Give me some examples about how you see that. For those of you who don't know, parentification is where a child is inadvertently put in a role to be like the other child or parentified in the experience. So like in mine, my mom didn't do this to me on purpose, but I saw her as such a victim in her divorce. And I took on a role of trying to kind of be her partner. And she didn't ever tell me to do that, but she also didn't really stop me from doing some of the things that I did that were really trying to replace my dad in a sense, because I saw the gap. And so, well, he's missing. So let me go ahead and try to pick up those pieces. And I wasn't really told not to do those things. I became like joined with her, and then we became more partners and allies, as opposed to me staying in that one down child position. Right. And again, it was not on purpose, but that's an example of what parentification looks like. So is that something you see often, and what do you do to call attention to it?
Yeah, I mean, I see it often. It's a little more common when children are older. Also a little bit more common when one parent has a really good, close relationship with that child. And again, it's just a matter of, first of all, good mental health services can really help with that, because as parents, we don't, it doesn't come with a manual. I have children and I don't always get it right. And a lot of times we don't realize that's what we're doing. We're hurting too, so it's a lot of mindfulness. It's a lot of make sure you are putting keeping your child in their lane as child. It's not their job to make you feel better. It's not their job to fix anything about your situation. You know,
it's not their job to help parent the other children because now you've lost your partner.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So this is where good mental health services really, really can help, because most parents don't realize this is what they're doing and don't realize it's detrimental.
Right. You know, another thing that I see with kids being put in the middle or whatnot is it can be a source of manipulation. So in other words, we talked in our other show about aligning with the sort of favored parent and how oftentimes a parent might inadvertently, whether intentionally or not, manipulate their child against the other parent, even if they're not abusive or even if they're not, you know, and when I say abusive, that they might hold different vantage points about what abuse looks like. But if a court and our law says this isn't abusive, it might not be ideal parenting.
Right.
But we can inadvertently align against that parent unintentionally. So do you see that? And what do you advise when you see that from, you know, the potentially what I would call the manipulative parent aligning against the other parent?
I do see that quite a bit, unfortunately. And if that person is my client, I, again, refer them to good mental health services and I tell them you are risking the court changing your parenting time order in such a way where your role is significantly reduced. You may go from an equal time schedule to maybe you only get to see your child 5 hours a week, once a week, because the court is now put in a position where if you're not going to change that behavior and be part of the solution, okay, maybe we need to talk about now that child maybe going and living with the other parent.
Is this what's meant by creating a loyalty conflict?
Yes.
Or is that something different?
Yes.
So is there more to say about that?
Well, I mean, and again, a lot of times this is done and it's not done purposefully. You know, if your child sees you as constantly upset or you're crying every time the child has to go see their other parent, that child's now feeling this loyalty to you in a way of, well, I can't even have a good time at my other parent's house, or I certainly can't tell that parent I'm having a good time because they're
like
going to feel bad. I'm betraying them.
Oh, wow. So
and that's all on a subconscious level.
Right. So what do we need to be saying when, let's say we are the favored parent, what do we need to be saying to our child before we drop them off at at our ex's parenting time?
Yeah, I mean, just a lot of affirmation, you know? I mean, you're going to have a fun time at your other parent's house. If it's, you know, if they are really truly upset about going for some reason, it's like, you know, set up a phone call. You know, when children are really little, I was called sleeps because I would always usually like check days on a calendar. That visual tended to be good with younger children. You know, 2 more sleeps. You know, and then you'll be back at mom's house. But I mean, just anything you can do to encourage them that you're okay, that they're going to be okay. Because children are okay if you're okay.
Right.
The reason why they're not okay is because they're worried about you.
Right. And they can adjust. They're resilient.
Yeah.
And so if we encourage that they can, you know, I know dad does it different than me. I know, you know, mom.
And that's okay.
And I know that you like the way I do it better, but it just doesn't matter. We have to be resilient. We have to be adaptable. We have to do, you know, we have to do it the way they want it done when it's their turn because they're your parent too.
Exactly. And sometimes what I would do with my own children is I would, you know, sort of in an age appropriate way, sort of let them know what my plans were while they were gone.
Right.
Now, if I was going to see a friend, if I was going to, you know, go do an activity. So they knew that I was not sitting around the home upset. You're going to have fun with your dad. I'm going to have fun over here and I'll see you in 2 days.
Right. Great. And what do you think about contact with the alternate parent what do you think what have you seen from the legal standpoint that's been the best when, you know, I'm not with my mom, I'm with my dad, it's his parenting time. What do you recommend related to how we communicate? Right.
I mean, I've seen it on both sides. You know, I've seen that what we call the non-custodial parent really abuse that to where they're calling the other child 10 times and it's affecting.
In this day and age, what about texting?
Yeah. I mean, again, everything should just be reasonable, right? You should be able to reach out to your child. Hey, how was school? Hey, what do you have for dinner?
Right.
Hey, what are your plans to my taste Friday? What are your plans? You know, you should be able to do that, you know, but it shouldn't be a situation where it's being used for a manipulative purpose. You know, again, now the child's going to feel bad that mom or dad is texting me 10 times while I'm at the other parent's house. So what I usually recommend when clients ask me, what's appropriate, what should be in my parenting plan, that if it's a day that you haven't seen your child, like if you're exchanging on a Wednesday and Thursday is your first day without your child, you should be able to have a phone call. You should be able to text whenever you want,
even like
obviously,
a check-in, like a day-end check-in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But not constantly throughout the day messaging.
Yes, because it's then interfering with the other parents' parenting time. Now they're not getting that quality time that you just enjoyed.
Well, and they don't get a chance to build some connection and loyalty because the child inadvertently is reaching out to the opposite parent when it's not their time to be the parent to be reached out to. So it pushes not having communication all day long will likely lead them toward needing to reach out to the parent that is meant to be the one to be talked to that day.
Yes.
And it gives them a chance to build connection and relationship. So I can see where that can be really disruptive if the parents don't set firmer boundaries around that.
And it is sometimes just a matter of education. If I see people really struggling with that, and they already have their own mental health provider, I normally refer them to co-parenting counseling.
Right.
And it's one mental health professional, and that's done together. And so people are either in the same room, it can be done remotely, but it's just getting them on the same page about rules and boundaries, and that makes a night and day difference for people who are struggling.
So what are some things that parents can look out for? Let's talk about that related to emotional distress in their children while going through this process of separation or divorce or whatnot.
I mean, one thing to, marked changes in behavior. If your child is really becoming, withdrawn or sullen and won't talk to one of the parents, you have to keep in mind too, that it's not necessarily the other parent's fault.
Right.
It is your child is now going from a one house to a two house life. And it's a big shift. And it's traumatic, just like the divorce is traumatic for you.
I forgot my soccer shoes. I left my retainer. Now there's all this anxiety around even just packing to shift spaces and things like that.
So it's a learning curve. And it's, I know it's difficult to talk about your soon-to-be ex-spouse about these things, but I found that people who are able to put their children and their children's needs first fare the best in the entire process.
So how can parents be mindful and put into action things that would ultimately reduce the stress and the trauma of their children if they have to go through that? What are some things that you recommend?
I mean, there are simple things like there should be a minimal amount of shuttling of things going back and forth. I get it if your kid plays lacrosse. You're not buying 2 sets of lacrosse equipment because it's expensive. Sure. But shoes, clothes, the basics, that you should have a set of everything at each house. So there's a minimum going back and forth. So it's not like, oh no, I forgot my soccer cleats or, whatever, because then again, now your child is anxious to even tell you because now you're going to be mad and then your other parent's going to be mad if they have to come and bring the things over. So while your children should have the accountability and the responsibility to, but it's a learning curve. They are not going to get it right every time, so it's having some grace for your children. And that's
well, think about how stressful it is even just to pack for a vacation.
Yes.
And if this kid has to do this every single week,
yes, you want to minimize the amount that's
and
put on them.
And it's expensive, but divorce is expensive.
Yes.
For sure. So what are some other things? Let's talk about introducing of new partners or new boyfriends and girlfriends.
Yeah.
What's the recommend there?
I usually recommend get through your divorce process first, because here it is the nuclear family's just now been fractured. And before that's even cold or settled, now there's a potential new partner, step parent, whatever being introduced to the children. I don't recommend it. And it's not necessarily that you have to even talk to the other parent first. I mean, if you have a good relationship, that's great. Sure. But I mean, at minimum, there needs to be a discussion of, okay, there's another person in my life. I'm going to introduce them to our child. And, that there's just some buy-in and something, because it's only going to benefit your child. Right. And I always say the more people that love a child, the better. So a new significant other in and of itself is not bad.
Well, and I think that something that gets confused oftentimes is if someone feels betrayed, like let's say I get divorced and my partner ends up with someone else sooner than I have grieved over the loss of this experience, I take this really personally.
Yes.
Like not only was I not enough to stay married to, I have, my own sense of loss and grief over that and the shame and whatever else not enoughs that are running around in my own head. And now this other person is introduced to, in that. I think oftentimes children can feel like they're betraying their parent when in fact that choice had nothing to do with the child.
And nothing to do with the new partner either.
And really nothing to do with the old partner.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I think that gets confused for a lot of people. It's like we have made a decision to separate, to move on. Now those choices are that person's like those are not, those are no longer my choice. I cannot determine or choose when my partner will or won't introduce, a new person into my children's lives.
Keep in mind, your children cannot move on.
Right.
Your children cannot move on, and think about being in your child's shoes.
Right. So being
there,
gentle and
say you're dad,
considerate.
and you've just started living separate and apart from mom, and your child has not even really gotten used to that yet. And now there's another just female figure. It's confusing, it's stressful, and it's
if children are really young,
Yes.
it's even more damaging
Yes.
because it's like now I have attachment fractures with my own parent, and then I'm meant to try to connect with this new person. And so my advice to people is wait a good long time before they are now involved and they can heal from their first attachment fracture before they're
and
asked to move in.
it doesn't mean that you can't have a significant other.
Sure.
It doesn't mean your child can't know about your significant other, but they don't have to have a relationship with your significant other quickly.
Right. I think it's about slowing down and not for the benefit of, not putting first the benefit of self and what's easiest, and most comfortable for me, but what is going to be the long standing impact on my children based on how fast I go and do these things.
Children first.
Yeah, ideally. So what about boundaries and structure, consistency? I mean, as a mental health professional, I know that the more consistency, structure, and boundaries and clarification of expectations is always best, but we find that is not always even the same in the same home. Right. So what do you recommend when it comes to being in two different homes and, dad does it this way, mom does it this way? How do we navigate that?
Yeah, it's tough, and it's a lot of trial and error. As far as the consistency of sort of that custody arrangement goes, I recommend people try to get that piece in place first. Figure out what kind of a schedule you're going to do. If it's going to be a week on, a week off, great. Start it, stick with it. Consistently as much as you're able. If you have really small children that, say can't read and don't know whether they're coming or going, when my son was little and couldn't read and it was causing him a lot of anxiety just not knowing what else am I going to be in today, I got him a calendar. And even though he couldn't read, he knew pink and he knew blue. And I would put little pink and blue X's on there and he could count. So we would count how many sleeps here, and then we're going to be this many sleeps at dad's. And once he knew where he was going to be,
he probably settled down.
His anxiety went way down. Right. So that's the easiest piece to start with. And as far as, rules and way you do things, like you said, that a lot of that exists even when you were together. And just know mom and dad.
Bedtime and screen time and all the different boundaries around.
I mean, it's always best that there's some consistency, that you're at least in the same realm with those things. But even if you're not, that's not necessarily bad that things are done two different ways. As long as there's clarification by both parents to the child. Okay, this is how it works here.
And here's why.
Yeah, and that the other parent knows this is how it works here. They don't have to agree with it, but they at least have to recognize that's the way mom does it. Right. And you're going to support that in mom's house, but we do it different here.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's really important because
it's hard for people to make that distinction.
It is. I'm really glad that you mentioned that because it is the source of so much contention within divorce. Well, dad doesn't do it this way and he lets me that, or you're the mean one because he lets me stay up late. And it's like, I totally get that dad doesn't have the same beliefs around bedtime, but when you're with me, this is what we're going to do because these are the reasons I value this, and that's okay. Dad can do it differently. It's okay for dad to choose it to do it differently. And I know that's confusing,
right? For you. And you cannot agree with the other partner, but you can have their back. You may not agree with the bedtime thing, but you'd be like, no, you know what? This is the way we do it here. Right. You need to respect that. That's the way dad does it. You need to respect that. And you can pull dad aside and be like, hey, can we talk about this? Because, and maybe you reach a resolution. Maybe you don't. You don't have to see eye to eye, but that's your child's parent. Right. You should respect that.
And I think that is the message that so many parents miss. You need to respect what your dad's wishes were related to that because he's your father.
Yes.
You may not want to go, do this errand or go to the baseball game or whatever those things are, but he has arranged for that to be what you're going to do, and you need to respect that and go along because he's your dad.
Yeah.
And same in the other homes. So I think that's really important that the messaging is in alignment with respecting the other parent, even when we choose to do things.
And it creates consistency for your children. Your children will know right out of the gate, so to speak, that, I can't go and complain to mom and mom is going to call dad and things are going to change at that. That's not going to work. Right. So you will see that behavior significantly diminish if you two just sort of stand your ground and support the other parent.
Right. And the emotional support that's needed, I think that it's saying, I know it's upsetting for you that it is that way, but you're going to be okay, and you need to go along and get along, and then you'll be back in a few days, and this is how we're going to do it. And I think that is oftentimes missing when co-parenting.
And they can vent and be heard with their own therapist.
Right. Yeah. So making sure, again, circling back again, the best decision you can make is the therapist. And then that therapist can be used, and I know we do this a lot here, as kind of a neutral third party to say, hey, mom, dad, here's what I'm seeing, here's what it's doing, here's what it's creating, and here's what I need for you guys to play more fairly in the sandbox so that it's not negatively impacting your child.
Clients ask me that all the time. What can I do in this situation that dad or mom is doing this? I go, have you talked to your child's therapist yet? When there's a therapist.
Right.
I said, they will tell you if one of you needs to do something different. And then you can either choose to show up or not.
Right. And then we have to look at ourselves and go, I might be part of the problem if I don't change the environment.
That's hard for people to do.
It's really hard. We have to eat a big shame sandwich.
Yes.
We have to look at my part of the equation in conflict and rupture. So I think that's really, I think, the most important topic about today is like getting on the same page enough and getting the messaging to be about respect for the other parent, regardless of if you can't stand them.
Yes.
Regardless.
Yes.
Because they are your children and they need to be first, and their parent is not going away.
Yeah. And you're not always going to get it right.
Right.
Have some grace for yourself.
Right.
This doesn't come with a manual. We're all just doing the best we can, but you can't change that behavior if you don't know what it causes. And so it's why I try to do this with clients. I'll talk to anybody who asks me about this is the impact it can have on your children. Right. I always tell clients, I'm your child's attorney.
Right.
I said, I'm always going to be thinking about
I'm your child's attorney. You guys are getting divorced, but I'm going to be looking out for your child. That's awesome. And I say the same thing when I work with kids. I'm like, you know what? I'm your child's therapist. I cannot be aligned with your agenda. I have to get them where they want to go based on the goals that you said, keeping in mind I'm a mother, keeping in mind I have children, and I understand the pressure and the overwhelm that happens related to being a parent. And if we want to get these changes to happen, we need to get in line with what the kid is seeing, experiencing, feeling. Otherwise, we're going to miss a whole lot, and that's our responsibility. So another thing that I've seen a lot of is conflict with the other parent in front of the child. So what kind of damage do you think that does? Yeah,
I mean, that to me is the biggest no-brainer. But again, we don't always get it right. There's an exchange. One parent says something. The other parent's had a long day and, and fires off a pithy remark. We're not always going to get it right. I said, but one thing I at least try to teach my own children is being accountable. I remember one time my son actually called me out on something like that and told me, and you said this and you did that. And I went, again, shame sandwich. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I did that. I owe your father an apology. And I called his father right in front of him and, and said, you know what? I said that before and that wasn't cool. And Connor brought it to my attention. He's not wrong. So I owe you an apology and here it is.
That's
and so
big
not
of
only,
you.
well, it's
if
not
only.
easy, but not only so did I mend that rift in our co-parenting relationship, I go, but I've just now taught my son what it means to be accountable.
Well, and you probably built some trust with your ex about here's how I want us to show up about one another in front of our child.
Yeah.
And here's my efforts to do that.
Yeah.
Which I think is really great for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the differences that children experience, how children of different ages or at developmental stages experience divorce?
Yeah, I mean, overall, most people think that the little children suffer the most and older children, it's going to be easier because they're older. In my experience, it's usually the exact opposite. Especially teenage children are more like, they tend to take it very personally. And because, teenagers are, are focused a lot on themselves. It's a lot of how dare you mess up my life, my senior year of high school with this, but I found that younger children are so resilient. And if you can demonstrate to them that, hey, I'm okay as the parent, this is kind of what we're doing from now on. Kids are like, okay, an adventure. So kids are so neuroplastic. And if you, with that consistency and showing your children that, yeah, this is okay. And you're going to your dad's house or you're going to your mom's house and it's okay. And they just grow up where that's their new norm, and
I mean, they're adaptable and they're resilient. Of course, that's considering we do all of these things that we're talking about today to the best of our abilities to minimize the upheaval and the disjointed non-structure and non-consistency.
Yes.
So I would say I would agree with that. All things being equal.
All things being equal.
If we consider those things.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, have you had a dream case that you're just like, this is the way to do divorce to minimize the damage of children?
Oh, yes. The best way is, we talked about it in our other episode, is collaborative divorce.
Mm-hmm.
You take the adversity, you take the court, you take everything that makes a divorce nasty out of that process. You actually have a child specialist that's on your team that is helping you write your parenting plan, that you can ask questions of. How do we do this? What should we do as far as this goes? And there's also usually a communication coach helping you to communicate better as a parent, helping you communicate better with your child. What do I do when my child asks me this? Communication coach and child specialist can help with that.
Get experts who know better because they've learned it.
Exactly. So you leave that process. You can either leave it with just the piece of paper that the judge signs, or you can leave with the piece of paper with a better co-parenting relationship with your now ex-spouse, and a parenting plan that's actually written for you and for your children and for your lives.
Ideal. And cheaper.
Cheaper and
way
quicker.
Cheaper. Right. All those things are in benefit for everyone involved.
Yes.
So the last thing I want to talk about is just, how do we make sure as the parents that we take care of our own mental health? Because if we can't put our oxygen mask on first, we're not going to have anything left for the people around us. What suggestions do you have?
And it's so counterintuitive, because at least, I don't know about you, but I was raised of, you do everything for family and your children first. And I have to try to teach clients that it's a shift. It's a shift to realize that the only way you can show up and be the best mom, the best therapist, the best lawyer, the best anything, is if you are putting yourself first and putting care of yourself first. So I teach clients, especially if they don't have resources for good mental health services, I make them go to yoga. I make them meditate. I make them do just
You can find those things on the internet.
Yes, just little tiny things that they can do for themselves, so they are showing up to be better parents.
Awesome. Well, I know this is a hard conversation. I know that a lot of times people do not want to hear some of the things they may or may not be doing well or right. But again, if we know better, we can do better. So I really respect and appreciate your candor and your
Thank you
wisdom.
for having me.
Yes, it's been a pleasure to have you here. And again, for not the funnest topic, but unfortunately a necessary conversation to have. So thank you again for being here. I appreciate all of your attention. I hope that you found this helpful. If you are going through this time of your life with a divorce, again, putting your children first is the major takeaway, and getting some experts to help you better understand what that is, because you're going through trauma yourself, and it's really hard not to see through the eyes of others when you're going through your own pain. So please get the supports and whatnot that will help serve you and get you through this process in a better way. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.